You're listening to This Week in E-Commerce, the Ecom Nation podcast. Dive into the top online retail headlines with your hosts, Paul Waddy and Mal Chia. Let's load up the cart.
This Week in E-Commerce, episode 38. I am Mal Chia, recording an audio-only episode as I recover from a little bit of a cold. Now, by the time this episode comes out, the federal budget will have been released, which means that on the next episode, Paul and I will attempt to let you know what this means for the retail sector. Now, obviously, there are a bit of tough times, so hopefully there is some good news there in terms of reducing some of our trading costs, which have been going up gradually over the years, which has been worsened by the fact that we've got lower consumer demand. Now, I'm not suggesting that consumer demand is going to magically increase over the 12 months, although it'd be great if it did. So hopefully what this means is that there will be tighter controls in terms of how much our trading costs, such as rents, electricity, wages, etc., are going to continue to grow. So hopefully there'll be some controls over that to make sure that not too many more retailers are squeezed out of the market. Now, we do have a big week of news, including the fact that AI is soon going to be making its way into a lot of product development. You're going to see that more and more. But before we go into that, we are going to dive into our first story of the week, which is that Tigerlily, which we have spoken about quite a bit over the last few months, in particular with Travis Wright, who was the GM of Esther & Co. before becoming CEO of Tigerlily in 2021. Good friend of the podcast, was leading a turnaround of Tigerlily, Jodie Mears and James Packersex's swimwear brand. Unfortunately, that didn't go to plan, and they did have to go into voluntary administration earlier this year. Now, this was the second time they went into voluntary administration. What's happened since, though, is that Seafolly, which is owned by the private equity group Bondi Brands Group, has bought the brand from the owners of Tigerlily, which is Crescent Capital Partners. So this is good news, as it appears that a very well-known and well-loved Australian swimwear brand is going to avoid landing on the scrap heap. So the intentions are that next year, Tigerlily will be restructured and then relaunched, is what we understand. Now, this is good news, like I said, on the front, that we don't lose another brand. Hopefully, this means that where some jobs will be able to be saved as well, which is ultimately what this is all about: being able to provide back to the economy by providing jobs, gainful employment, and also hopefully being able to export to other markets as well. Now, interesting that this has been picked up by Bondi Brands Group. I do know quite a few people at Seafolly, and Seafolly is going very, very well. Again, they had their fair share of troubles not too long ago, but over the last few years under this new ownership group, they have since experienced quite a bit of growth from what I understand. So I dare say that by packaging these out together, both of these brands together, you're able to get some level of efficiencies in terms of being able to share some resources, infrastructure, IP across both brands to increase the overall net profit of that. And this goes back to something which I talked about quite a few episodes ago now, probably towards the end of last year, about the fact that a lot of brands now are going to be looking at horizontal acquisition. How do we acquire similar brands to enable us to leverage efficiencies across the different brands in the group? And we saw this with the Hut Group in the UK attempting to acquire Adore Beauty at the end of last year. So that's one which we look forward to seeing where this goes next year, and hopefully that quite a few people will continue to be able to be employed by Tigerlily. All right, moving on to another story. AKA Brands, who are the parent of Culture Kings, posted lower sales for the first quarter of the year. And now they have said that this was due to poorer performance in Australia and New Zealand, where they saw a 19.1% decline in their ANZ business due to the worsening macroeconomic conditions here. But they did see that US sales rose 6.2%. During this as well, they also managed to narrow their loss from 8.9 million to 9.6 million, with an adjusted EBITDA of 0.9 mil compared to 2.2 mil in the prior year. So some mixed news there, but the interesting thing there is the growth of the US market. So for those who don't know, Culture Kings, about 12 or so months ago, launched their flagship store in Vegas. And this place is just spectacular. And if you read the earnings report from the earnings call from AKA Brands, They did highlight the fact that they're expecting this to continue to grow and are now looking to other opportunities to launch retail stores over in the US. And considering the fact that when you look at a Culture King store, it is truly a temple to the brand. It's not just a run-of-the-mill retail store. It is an absolute experience there. And this is what retail needs to be. Retail needs to be an experience, and that's how you grow retail as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing where Culture Kings can continue to take it. Considering that, they are a relatively established brand, well, they are a very established brand here in the US, so in Australia, whether they can do the same in the UK, so in the US. This is the cold talking right now. So in the US, if they're going to be able to grow over there and launch more stores and continue to grow that experience of what it means to be Culture Kings. So that's going to be really exciting to see the growth of an Australian brand over there. But AKA Brands also reporting that Princess Polly, following a similar strategy as well, looking to roll out multiple bricks and mortar retail stores over in the US. Okay, now as we move into the first major story of the week, we are going to be talking about Power Retail's latest report, which is about Australia's most loved retail brands. Now, unsurprisingly, when you're talking about the most loved, you're probably also talking about the biggest as well. So if you look through the report, the brands here all tend to be on the bigger side. Now, I'm conscious that the majority of our listeners do come from the SMB market, but there's still a lot to be learned here. So they've done this based on what the NPS score is of various retailers. And going through it, they're all big ones, like I said before. So there's brands like Forever New, Nike, Mecca, Skechers, Repco, Bonds, very big names. But there's plenty to be learned from them. Now, the number one brand across all age groups was the Iconic. So the Iconic took out first place for the most loved Australian retail brand. And then by different demographics as well, as they were always in the top 2 or 3, let's say. So between 1834, Mecca was number 1, Iconic was number 2. And then in the older demographics as well, they were also within that top 10 as well. So ages 34 plus, Adore Beauty was number 1, but Iconic was 63. But overall, they came in with the highest NPS score of 64. Now, what's the importance of NPS? And a lot of people don't use NPS, or at least don't measure it. But for me, it has always been a number which I look at really closely. And you always do ask that NPS question, which is how likely are you to recommend this brand to your family and friends? Where if you're a 9 or a 10, you're considered a promoter, 5 and below a detractor, and in between an undecided. So what the NPS score is that overall, looking at your entire customer base, how much do people love you? So in the Iconic's case, it turns out quite a lot. That they love them quite a lot. And when they dug into the research and looked at why, a lot of it was by analysing the NPS data and the comments people leave. And it really shows how important customer service and that whole customer experience is in terms of whether people think that whether they love you or not, in other words. Customer experience could not be any more important. So much effort gets put into what happens before the sale, whether it be your Facebook ads or your Google ads or your emails or your website, but not enough investment goes into what happens after the sale, after someone chooses to buy from you. The peak end rule is a rule which says that the 2 moments of a transaction, of any experience which a customer remembers the most, are the peak and the end of it. For retailers, that means the peak is the moment when they buy or immediately after they buy, and the end is when they receive the product, or that whole experience from the moment they click the buy button for online retail. You really need to be thinking about how do you optimize for those, because when you look through all these loved brands and what they optimize for, so many of them really over-index in this area. Where if you look at the expectations for a response, so many customers now expect that response to be in less than an hour. So particularly when it comes to channels like chat, text, social media, even email, they expect that response really quickly. Matter of fact, over chat, text, they're expecting that response. Over 50% of customers are expecting the response in less than an hour. Yeah, and when it goes to like email and online forms, there is a little bit more leeway. But generally speaking, people expect to get that answer quickly because they want to know. They can't bear that cognitive load of having to wait and find out something later. So it's really important to think, how do you optimize for that? How do you ensure that your customers are getting the answers they need? Or even being able to get those answers proactively as well. For instance, if there are going to be delays and you know about those shipping delays, why don't you automate that message? Why don't you automate that communication to say to them that it is a peak time and things are going to be late? Now, a lot of people do say, oh, we put it on the website, we put it on the checkout that there's going to be delays. But honestly, people don't really read that. You're always better off over-communicating than under-communicating. And so when you look at all these brands, what they do really well is that they over-communicate through every single step. And they overcorrect as well when there are mistakes made. If you look at brands like Appliances Online, who didn't actually make the list, surprising enough, they're a brand who I consider to really over-index in customer experience, because that is what they differentiated on. Even if you're selling someone else's products, regardless of the size you are, and if you have products which other people are also selling, you can absolutely compete on customer experience. Matter of fact, I highly encourage it. It should be the thing which you compete on the most, or price. And for most retailers, competing on price is just a race to the bottom. So really think about how you could be using customer experience better, providing a better customer experience so that customers, really there's no argument that when they want to buy that product, they're going to choose you to buy that product from. Okay, and moving on to our final story we're going to be talking about. It is that Moderna, who were the makers of one of the COVID vaccines, have recently partnered with OpenAI. Now, this is a fantastic story. And you're going to ask, what does this have to do with retail? Well, I'll tell you what it has to do with retail. It's about the fact that AI is now partnering with one of the largest drug makers in the world to help develop new vaccines, to help develop cures for viruses. Now, this is huge news because it means that how far these algorithms have developed means that a company like Moderna is now trusting AI to assist with developing over 15 new products within the next 5 years. So you need to ask yourself, if AI can help develop a vaccine, how can you be using it? What are the opportunities which are available right now for your brand, for your business, to be leveraging AI to help develop new products, to help optimize your product roadmap, to look at your demand planning? Now, I'm a firm believer that AI over the next 12 to 18 months is going to start becoming more and more a part of what we do. We are still very, very early on that curve of that AI adoption, of that J curve. We're probably at the starting 25%. In a recent survey of different marketing professionals from the retail side, about 25 to 30% were saying that they were using AI regularly now. And marketing was the part of the business which appeared to be adopting it the fastest. But it's still relatively early on, still relatively early days. So you can imagine in other parts of the business, such as product, demand planning, operations, AI has barely even made a dent yet, which means there's so much opportunity to still be looking at how do we use AI better within our business? How do we look at AI in every part of our business? But right now, from this story with Moderna, that opportunity they found is in product development, which is something we should be looking at already. To be importing all our data, uploading the data about the most popular colors, styles, trends, etc., and putting it in there to understand what is that data telling you. What should you be buying more of, less of? Where is fashion going? But also, given how much training goes into these models as well, actually using it as a forecasting tool, as a trend forecasting tool to predict where trends are heading. Fashion, as you know, is relatively cyclical. It comes in waves. If you look right now, early 90s fashion is all the rage. Where are things going to go in the next 35 years? Put that into ChatGPT or Gemini and ask that question and find out, okay, if that's the trend, if this is a cycle, where are things potentially heading to? And then how can you get ahead of that? Now, particularly if you don't have access to trend forecasting services like WGSN, which is a fantastic resource, and a lot of people don't because it's really bloody expensive. You can use ChatGPT as a trend forecaster to help tell you where those trends are and what you should be looking at so that you can understand where we need to be investing our time. So the opportunity with AI is here right now for you to take. So I highly encourage you to really think about your business and identify where in your business you should be using AI right now and what data you could potentially upload anonymously, of course, into these AIs to be able to help you predict where the future is and be able to make sure that you are building for that future rather than overspending in the present. That's all we've got time for this week. As always, thank you very much for listening. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via email. You can reach me on malchia.com or paul@paulwaddy.com, and you can contact either of us through either of those means. Otherwise, on LinkedIn, please do connect with us. We'd love to hear from you. If you do have any questions, feedback, send them through, and thanks for listening.